So now moving on to DNA. What I would like you all to focus on is just on the name, on the terms. And maybe when you hear this down the road, you can say, oh yes, Kathy mentioned that, and I will explore it further, because I really won't be able to go into a lot of detail, but I'm going to give you some tips about how you can use DNA to further your research. So we're going to look at test options. We're going to look at companies. We're going to look at interpreting your results, how we use those results to connect with cousins, and what's the future. So big topic in an hour and a half. So, and I will get the handout to you this week. Okay, first, well, why DNA? Well, DNA lets us build our family tree. And that's what we're all doing with genealogy. It helps us identify our ethnicity and any cultural ties we might have, which gives us clues to building our family tree. And maybe down the road, you heard that you were related to a Cherokee princess, or that you have a Mayflower connection, or that you are related to royalty. Well, your DNA can help confirm that. So it is a tool that can help us do that. Definitely the Native American connection. 23andMe is a health DNA site, and so it can help you identify potential health issues. And it can help you, if you're adoptee, find birth parents and find lost siblings and relatives. And of course, it can help identify human remains, and that would be crime victims and war casualties. And they're still finding the remains from World War II and the Korean War, and identifying those remains through the DNA. And more recently, DNA has been used to solve some criminal cases, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. So DNA has turned genealogy upside down. This is just an amazing thing that has happened in the last 20 years. 30 million tests have been taken globally, to the extent that 60% of Americans who are of European descent have basically had their DNA exposed. And what I mean to say is, if one of us has our DNA test taken, then that means our family has had their DNA test taken. It's not just us, it's our family. So when family members say to you, oh, privacy or whatever, it's all over for them. If you've taken it, their DNA's out there. DNA supports and improves our traditional research. So if we've been doing our research, DNA is an amazing way to prove that what we've been doing is right, or to disprove it. And we have to realize that it does not lie. And so if there's something in there that is not what we think it should be, we need to explore that. So through DNA, we hope to find cousins who know more about our family history and can fill in some of the blanks and help us tell the story of our family. This magazine, Family Tree, is the main genealogy magazine. And if you enjoy getting magazines, and it is also online, it is also an e-version, but it is a great magazine. And a lot of the people who are leaders in this field write articles for it. And I've really enjoyed subscribing to this magazine over the years. So that might be a nice birthday gift or Christmas gift or something. Okay, so DNA. It gives us information that links us to our ancestors. It connects us to people today who have the same DNA. And interestingly enough, it provides, now these are again terms, a haplogroup. It provides a haplogroup, which gives us the deep information on our ancestors. And that's what tracks the migration of our ancestors from the earliest time. So I think it was the lady who goes back to the 1400s. Haplogroups help us with that. The National Geographic Genographic Project came out with an Ancestry DNA kit in 2005. Some of you may have taken that kit. And their main goal was to track migration. This is a map from 2008, and these are haplogroups. And the haplogroups show where we're all from Africa, it's believed. And shows how our migrations, the H's up there are largely European. You can see HV, HV, but these are how people moved out. And what happened with National Geographic is they sent people into remote areas in Africa, Micronesia, Polynesia, Asia, where groups, indigenous peoples had not intermarried, and they took their DNA tests, and then they compared them to other people, and they tracked the migration of these groups. It's pretty amazing. So this is something that our DNA shows us. And it's just getting started. Currently, you take it by spitting saliva in a tube or taking a cheek swab. But MyHeritage and other companies have announced that it has plans to test artifacts such as an envelope, and they're doing it now, a postage stamp, a headband, glasses, a glasses case, a scarf, a hat. So if you are interested in pursuing this, you may be able to get the DNA of your parents if you have something that they wore or had. And this is pretty amazing. But I have to say, DNA is not for the faint of heart. And companies all have a disclaimer to not be held responsible for any discoveries that you might make that are surprising. And believe me, there are bound to be surprises. If you are interested in pursuing this, and there are now support groups for people who have found surprises. These are two books, if this interests you. This one, The Stranger in My Genes, is written by Bill Griffith. He is a financial consultant with CNBC. He's on the board of the New England Historical Genealogical Society, and he's written a number of histories on his family. And his cousin said to him, "Oh, let's take the DNA for fun." So he did, and he found out that his cousin was not his cousin, and his father was not his father. And this is a book about his journey to discover who his birth father was and to reconcile with it. His mother was still alive, his father had passed on, and it's about the conversations he had with his mother and the story of what happened. And it's a pretty moving book for someone who's written about a family that no longer is his blood family, his cultural family, but no longer his blood family. So that is a very interesting book. Another book, which was a bestseller a couple of years ago, is called Inheritance, a memoir of genealogy, paternity, and love. Dani Shapiro is another journalist and writer, and she discovered that she was, her father is a sperm donor. And although she's in her 40s, maybe 50, there were some sperm donations that were going on that long ago, and she tracks down her family and connects with her sperm donor father and the surprises that she had from that, and the half sisters and brothers that she now has. So those are two books that go into it. They call this a non-paternal event, an NPE, a non-paternal event, discovering that someone that you thought was in your lineage is not in your lineage. And I've had actually 3 instances now with discovering this through DNA connections that I've had. One was a child raised by the mother and the father did not know the child existed. Another was a pregnant mother who was abandoned 90 years ago, married into another, father married another and raised a family. And the third is my own child who was adopted. The birth father's family did not know that she existed. So just to go into a little detail about each of these, the child raised by the mother, this was, I have about 20 Swedish cousins who have done their DNA. So when I look at my DNA, the top first cousins are all 20, and I know exactly who they are. And one day, this first cousin pops up, and I have never seen this name before. Immediately, there is a buzz from all my cousins who have also seen him pop up, and I start to get the phone calls. Who is this? Who is this? We don't know who this person is. He then writes to one of the cousins and says, "I'm looking for my father, and I see a group of you are probably related to me, and you may have information about my father." So I looked at this a little bit more closely. And remember what I said about time and location, date and location? He told me where he was born. He told me when he was born. And I looked at my 21st cousins. I've got a big Swedish family, 21st cousins, 10 of who are males. And I could see who was born in that, who was living in that town at that time, and who would have been the right age for this young man to be born. And I knew who the father was. So what do I do with this information? This cousin is not married and has no children. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should just keep it quiet or we should drop it or whatever. I didn't want to call his sister because I knew she'd be my first cousin. I knew she'd be really upset. So I called her daughter, this gentleman's niece, and I said, "What do we want to do about this?" She says, "I'll go and talk to him. I'll deal with it. I'll go talk to him." So she went and talked to him. He was delighted. He has no children. He was delighted. He said, "Please tell him to call me." The end of the story is that they are connected. He has moved back east to be by his son, and it's worked out beautifully. So that is a really good story. And this young man wrote to me again, and he said, "Thank you. I've been looking for my father for 38 years. So that is a good ending to that story. Second story is about another cousin. Mother was abandoned 90 years ago. Father married another. And the children decided that they wanted to find out who their father's family was. And they located the family. And the family didn't want to talk to them, didn't want to have anything to do with them, didn't believe them. Went by for a couple of months, and then they were contacted again, and they too have made connections. This baby has passed on. He was 90. But the children have made connection with the family of their grandfather, in essence. And then my own child's story. One day she gets an email, "Hi, cousin, who are you?" It's a possibility that a parent and sibling can turn up on your DNA match list. A first cousin can turn up on your DNA match list, and that's who this was, a first cousin. My daughter and this first cousin have the same grandparents. So the first thing she needed to do was to figure out if he was maternal or paternal. She figured out that he was paternal because she pretty much knew a little bit about her birth mother already. So that narrowed it down. If the first cousin matches with other first and second cousins, then you can determine whether it's maternal or paternal. And we'll go into that a little bit more. And you can identify the aunts and uncles. And one of them is going to be the birth parent. Okay, let's look at this a little bit more particular. I've changed all the names here, but this is the situation with my daughter. I'm calling her Barbara Smith. She knew her name of her mother. She thought she knew the name of her father. Peter writes her and says, "Hi, cousin, who are you?" And she starts this conversation through, it was through 23, it was through 23andMe, which does not give your email. So it's totally brokered by the website. She finds out that he's got 3 uncles and lots of first cousins. And she finds out the names of these uncles. The uncles are Tim, Scott, and Joshua. And then Linda and Nancy pop up, other first cousins. And Peter tells her that they are Scott's children. That eliminates Scott as a father. Scott's eliminated. Peter goes to Sylvia and says, "Mom, there's a situation here that's probably the daughter of one of your brothers." And Sylvia says, "Let's not go there. Let's drop this one. That we don't need to do that." He says, "Mom, won't you take a DNA test?" She says, "No, I don't think that's what I want to do." So my daughter sees that she knows now it's either Tim or Joshua. And we've built that family tree using obituaries and using other family trees and putting it together. And believe me, Facebook tells you a lot. So if this is of concern to you, there are ways of privatizing your Facebook. This family is all over Facebook. So Sarah was able to put together, Sarah, that's my daughter, was able to put together family tree based on a lot of Facebook things and things on obituaries, because obituaries always list the next of kin. So last month, she gets an email from Scott. Scott must have gotten a DNA Christmas present, because he's now all over Ancestry, and he's posting his tree. And it's quite clear that it's either Tim or Joshua. My daughter is a little nervous right now, and she's not going anywhere with this. She says, I know enough, and it's fine. I know enough about this family. I've had this nice dialogue with Peter and a couple of other cousins she's connected with, second cousins. She says, that's fine. They know I'm out there. I'm just happy with my own family. And she's taking a breather from that. But I do want to say that it happens fast and it's all there. Oh, and I do want to say that the father that's on her adoption papers is not this father. So that's very interesting. So surprises happen. Okay, 3 DNA tests. The first one is a Y-DNA, and that follows your male line, and that will take you back 20 generations to 1400. You can follow the surname, and that's a very helpful test. The mitochondrial is a female line. It's a little trickier because the female name changes. That also will go back 20 generations. Richard III, whose bones were discovered in England about 8 years ago, they used the mitochondrial to prove that he was Richard III. You may remember reading about that. Was in Leicester, England. And so it is very helpful for remains that are found thousands of years ago. But the one we're going to focus on is autosomal, and that goes back about 4 to 6 generations, and it's male and female lines. Okay, so the mtDNA links to sons and daughters carried forward only by daughters, and it may go back 20 generations, and it does provide a haplogroup. Okay, so autosomal, 4 to 6 generations, and it identifies DNA pieces that are the same and then guesses at the relationship. There are 5 companies that do this: Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, and Living DNA. Ancestry has 18 million kits out there. It is by far the largest. So if you're thinking of doing a DNA test and you haven't, Ancestry would be the place to start. Family Tree DNA is 1 million kits, and these are the go-getters. The Family Tree DNA offers Y-DNA and mtDNA. These are really serious genetic genealogists. 23andMe is health, MyHeritage is overseas, and Living DNA is England. So if you want to do Ancestry, you are given matches and an opportunity to connect with matches, but you have to pay more money if you want to do some of their tools that they have, their shared matches and other things. So the Ancestry is, you pay for the kit, and then you can pay for a DNA subscription, which is not as much as the others. But again, money is involved with Ancestry. Family, you pay for the kit, you get everything. 23andMe, you pay for the kit, you get everything. But 23andMe has found that you can't make money just on selling kits. So they now have an upgrade where you can get more health information. You know, they've realized they need to make more money. MyHeritage, you pay for the kit and you pay for a little bit more for the tools. And the tools for MyHeritage are great. So it is worth it if you're interested in connecting with European matches. And Living DNA, you pay for the kit and you get what they have. So those are the 5 companies. I will put this in our notes so you can look at this a little bit more, but this is a comparison of the 5 companies, and you can see what the aspects are. So I will put that into the notes and you can look at that a little bit closer. Okay, so you've got an Ancestry DNA and you want to go over to MyHeritage. You can download your raw DNA from MyHeritage from Ancestry and send it over to MyHeritage, and it's cheaper. You can move your DNA around between these companies and you save some money, and it works fine. But Ancestry and 23andMe have different algorithms, and they do not allow you to transfer raw data from, say, MyHeritage to them. You have to take it with them. But they'll let you take their raw data that you paid for and send it over to the others. So I hope that makes sense. It is a way to save some money, is moving your raw data around. You simply download it and upload it, and it's fairly easy. They give you instructions how to do that. And I have done that. I did that with MyHeritage, and and it worked fine. Ancestry, again, there's a 14 3-day trial. You get 30% off if you're an ART member for the first year. And there's a DNA only membership option, which is not as expensive if you want to get your matches and communicate with your matches and not pay for all the other stuff Ancestry has. And you're only able to see public trees if you're a paying member of Ancestry. So that's why it is, you know, they get you with the DNA, and then if you want to do these other things, you pay more. All right, so here's what the tests tell us. They tell us about ethnicity, where we're from. They give us matches with others, cousins, and they give us tools to connect with the matches and to find who the most recent common ancestor is. Okay, so this is Ancestry. This is what it looks like. Those of you that have Ancestry know this looks familiar. There's 3 parts to it. There's the ethnicity, there's the matches, and then there's the tools. And Through Lines is one of the tools, and it's a great source. You can see that they've given me a 51% Swedish, a 20% Norwegian. Not quite right, because my mom is not Swedish, she's English and Scandinavian. But you know, the Norsemen did come down into Scotland, and so that 20% Norway is probably reflected in my Scottish background. And Sweden and Norway was owned by Sweden and run by Sweden during the 1800s. So that's my ethnicity. Ancestry develops genetic communities. They divide you up into genetic communities. This is actually more useful than your ethnicity. They figure out where your people came. And you can see I have an early Connecticut and New York settlers. This is really great, and it's really true. And I will say that this is all true too. They've hit this right on it. They use your DNA and your family tree to pull this together. Okay, so if I go into the early Connecticut and New York settlers, and I start with an overview, these are towns where people who have my DNA are located. They're still in this area. If I go into 1725, you can see I've started to move up into Canada already. 1750, I've gone into more. I'm still there with the revolution. 1775, my loyalists are moving. They're out of there. They're moving north into Canada. 1800, I've got Michigan. We're moving into Michigan. 1820, and this is all true. This is at least according to my genealogy. I'm still in Michigan. I'm definitely up in Canada now. 1850, we've got the gold rush. And by 1875, my family's moved out to California. 1900, my family's moved up to Seattle, my mother's family. 1925, I'm in the valley. The Swedes are in the valley. 1950, more California. So this is a map of the migration of your people. This is just amazing. Based on your DNA, in conjunction with your family tree that you've posted. I think this is an amazing gift. And this you would only have an opportunity to observe if you pay for the bells and whistles for Ancestry. Okay. That New York, Connecticut little thing that they carved out is a genetic community. They have taken the DNA of other people who they believe were in that area in the 1870s, in the 1950s, and put you in a community with them. And then they've looked at your family tree and they put it together. And Ancestry has over 1,000 genetic communities. And they're much more useful than an ethnicity breakdown. Ethnicity breakdown is interesting to talk about, but this is helpful for those of us who are doing genealogy. The other thing that Ancestry does, and the other direct-to-consumer companies, are they share centimorgans, and they share, and I look at pretty much 20 centimorgans or over. They share your cousin relationships, they share ancestral locations, and they share surnames. So those are all very helpful as we try and make our matches. I look at DNA like a tossed salad. It's like you put in the lettuce, you put in a tomato, you put in a cucumber, maybe some nuts, maybe some raisins, and everybody gets a different amount of each thing in their serving that you give. So a brother and sister who share 50% DNA, so my brother may have more nuts than I have, or I may have more raisins. Our DNA is not going to be a straight 50-50 of our mother and father. Our nephew and nieces are not going to be the same. But you can pretty much gauge that 50% of your DNA is going to reflect that of your father and 50% of your mother. A grandniece or nephew is going to have 12.5%. A first cousin once removed is going to have 6.5% of your DNA. So this is just, again, this will be in the notes, but this would be the way to analyze your matches, or a possible way. The first thing you do is select a known match. Pick somebody you know that's on your matches, that you know they're on your paternal side or your maternal side, and know how they're connected to you. And it helps if it's an older relative because they're closer, they go back further than you do. And when you pick that person, figure out who you share as an ancestor. So if you're a first cousin, you share grandparents. If you're a second cousin, you share great-grandparents. Use the tools that the company has. Use that tool. Create a genetic network, which would be that group of people that are related. And the centimorgans are the way you measure how much DNA you have in connection with someone else. So they help you determine what the relationship is. And then you do the genealogy. Okay, so let's go into my matches. And that's the second part of Ancestry. Now I've hid the names because I didn't want to be I wanted to maintain some kind of privacy. But I picked my first cousin, and her name is Ingrid. She's my genealogy cousin buddy. And I know exactly where she is in my family tree. She's a first cousin once removed, actually. And she shares 440 centimorgans with me. She's a first cousin once removed, and she shares 6% of DNA with me. That would be correct. And I went down the list to make sure who had a public tree. And she does. She has 171 people. And Ancestry has picked a common ancestor. She's a known on my matches list. So I start with her. I pull up her, and I see that we share great-grandparents, which we do. And everything that's green here matches what's in my family tree. So everything is the same. Her father is a brother to my grandmother. Okay, so here we are. Okay, I can click on ethnicity, and I can see that she's Swedish and whatever. And then I can click on shared matches. That means that Ingrid and I share DNA with the people that come up. And these are the people that, it's much longer list than this, but these are the people that can come up. So I look at these shared matches, and some of them I know and some of them I don't. And I see that this one here has 64 people, a public tree, and a common ancestor. And I say, aha, this person is obviously a Nystrom. That's the family here. That's my genetic network. Let's see how this person's related. Oh, I did want to show you that there are charts where you can see if they have 425 centimorgans, then you can tell yourself they're first cousins once removed, or you can figure out their relationship. I will put this chart in the minutes too. This is a way of figuring out a relationship based on centimorgans. Again, 50%. Ingrid is a first cousin once removed. There's another way you can do this. It's called DNA Painter, and you can actually put in the amount of centimorgans, and then it will show you what you have. I'll do this really quickly. So Ingrid is 440. They tell me if there's 440 chromosomes, these are my options. She's not a great aunt. She's not a half great aunt, but I do know she is a first cousin once removed. So DNA Painter is a site that can quickly show you what your centimorgans, what the relationship would be, which helps you when you're plotting your family tree. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going into, I've just looked at this person, and I want to look at his family tree that he has up there. And they're saying, well, yes, he connects with your grandparents. So he's a first cousin. He's a first cousin. And here are my grandparents. So I now have a genetic network. I have Ingrid, I have this first cousin, and I know that we are all Nystroms. And I know that that first cousin is in right here with my grandparents. And I know that Ingrid is with another one of these. And I start to put together their trees with my trees and to place them in my trees. So after you've got your shared matches, you do your genealogy based on their trees. It's a little trickier when they don't have a tree. You have to decide whether you want to write them. I will tell you that their tree may be on Google. You may find your tree in another place, but start with those that have trees. That makes it a lot easier. So they still have more tools. They haven't just left us with that. Shared matches are a start, but 3 companies have given us amazing tools. These are tools that these 3 companies give you, which help you do genealogy, put together a family tree. Ancestry has through lines. That's the 3rd component here. And through lines actually show you, and I'm going to show you how this works, how many DNA matches they think are connected to the common ancestor. Now here's Jacob Victor. That's that Nystrom one that we were working with. They're telling me that there are 10 DNA matches that they think are connected to Jacob Nystrom. They've done the work for me. They've done the sharing. They figured out the chromosomes. They're not always right, so you can't always count on it, but they sure are right enough of the time to work with. So Jacob Victor, I go into Jacob Victor. Here he is. And I look at the through lines and I see Jacob Victor, here I am. I see that this cousin here is connected to Myrtle, my aunt. And I see that Jenny, who is a sister to my grandmother, has 2 DNA matches. So if I were to click on this, I could see who they are. I see that my uncle, my great uncle, has 3, and another great uncle has 3. So they've almost done the work for you of sharing, and this is really, really helpful. So through lines is a tool that you can use if you are an Ancestry member. My Heritage also has a tool like this, and you can see over here in this DNA You go into the DNA matches, works the same way as Ancestry, and they have tools. And the tool they have is the theory of relativity. This is my ethnicity. Again, they've given me more English just because of the database they have, the reference points they have. But again, it's sort of mixed up because of those Norsemen who came down into Scotland and England. I also, just out of an interesting thing is, my Swedish family is from a little town called Finneruja, which was settled by Finns. So that explains why I have 2.4% Finnish, because they came in and settled in the town. Okay, so back to theory of relativity. Go into your matches. Again, this is the European one. I don't know as many people on this site because there are a lot of Europeans, but it's good for connecting with Europe. Go down and look and see who's got a theory of relativity. Here's someone who does. A first cousin twice removed. And they're saying that there's a theory of relativity here. So they've shown me a possible family tree. And here's this person. And I believe this is correct. This is the Anderson side of my family. The other is Nystrom. Anderson married Nystrom. And just if you're confused about second cousins twice removed and all, let me just give you a quick little explanation of that. This person is twice removed because he is 2 generations younger than I am. I am the same generation as his grandfather. So that's where the removed comes from. Here I am, my father. When you're actually identifying, ignore yourself, take the oldest person, ignore yourself, ignore your parent, and count generations. 1, 2, 1 generation, 2 generation, 2 removed, twice removed. So that's how they figure that out. This theory of relativity is correct. He's got 107 centimorgans. That would be in keeping with second cousin, twice removed, if you looked at a centimorgan chart. And then family tree, which is the health site, does not have your family tree. They only have your DNA. So they can't put names in there. They don't know who these people are, but they are right on based on my DNA. And this is how it works. Here I am. Okay, here's my parents. This is my mother. Follow over here, my grandparents. My mother has a brother who's got a child, who's got a child, who's got a child. These people I can see are related to my uncle. Here's my father's side, same thing. So they allow you to put in the names if you want and keep this as your family tree. But based only on my DNA, they are correct in figuring out who these people are based on the amount of centimorgans I have. I mean, isn't that amazing? I think this is just amazing. So family tree also, they call it family tree on 23andMe, is another tool that you can use. So it is overwhelming. And where do you begin? Well, you focus on one genetic network, which you've gotten through the sharing tool, and you know who your common ancestor is. You start with a known match and you look for shared matches, and you look for shared matches that have a family tree, because that's the most help to you, and have a common ancestor. You use their DNA tools, all of them that they have, and you build a family tree and you do the genealogy. And that's what it's all about. It's an amazing, amazing resource. I've sort of grappled with different ways of trying to keep track of this. I'm not an Excel person, but I have played around with a spreadsheet to keep track of these different people. And as I mentioned last week, I use Evernote to keep track of my correspondence, because there's that optical character recognition feature where you can look up a word and they'll pull up the note. So I have used Evernote. But I'm now beginning to use my software to keep track of DNA matches. And here's a case of, I don't really know this person's first name. I haven't written to them. They're only 18 centimorgans, but I know exactly where that person fits in. These are great-great-grandparents. And I put them in my tree in reunion. I'm not putting everybody in, I'm just putting the ones that I think this person might have some interesting information, and he's on my list to connect with, because this is my Hollister crew. And but I'm including in my software. So you can decide how you want to include your DNA matches. Another organizational challenge. Okay, so why do we go to all the trouble with DNA? Well, we want to connect with cousins. And remember, cousins have family trees and photographs and family Bibles and diaries and journals and letters and address books and all kinds of things. We want to know what more about our family. And these are cousins that have that information. So I am a big podcast listener, and another person that I listen to is Amy Johnson Crow. Her podcast is Generations Cafe. And she suggests that when we write to cousins, they don't respond because your match is only interested in ethnicity. They got it as a Christmas present and they don't really want to connect with you. Or your match is an adoptee and they don't know it. They don't know who they are. They don't know anything about their family tree. Or your match is a total surprise and they really don't know. Or your relationship is too far out and fourth cousins don't always know about further down the line. And your message may be too generic. So when you're writing to cousins, and remember, family tree DNA, you write directly to the email, but the others are brokered through the website. They don't see your email. It goes through the website unless you decide to give it to them and continue your conversation off the site. So introduce yourself, include the relationship, name the common ancestors, show that you're doing some research, indicate you want to collaborate, and be sensitive to the fact they may not be interested in sharing information, or they may not have done any research. So Diane Southern, who is a DNA guru, says it's like writing to a cousin's is like writing to a first date. You don't want to tell them too much, but you want to tell them enough and keep them interested, but you don't want to give everything away. So when I was writing to Donald, I said, I'm the great-granddaughter of Anders Petter Andersen and Fredrika Johansdottir. And I told when they immigrated and where they immigrated to. And I asked if they might be willing to share the names of their grandparents or their family tree. And that I understand that if they don't have time to share information, but just let me know that you received this and that you're not interested. Otherwise, you still got that hanging out there, hoping that they might have something. So think about how you want to write to your cousins if that's something you want to do. Actually, I've gotten so much information not writing to people just from family trees and things they post that's been helpful in itself. And if you're, I do want to just share with you that there are a couple organizations that really help with adoption. Search Angels is one. People help you freely if that is something that you're interested in. Another one is DNA Adoption. And the Family Search Wiki has all kinds of sites that you can pursue. It even goes by state and how you can go about finding records. Notice here that these are avenues to the Children's Aid Society, the New York Foundling Hospital. The National Orphan Train Complex is an interesting organization. Those were the children that were sent and adopted in the Midwest. Cindy's List, which is that web portal I mentioned earlier, has adoption. Now, not to confuse you further, but there are even more DNA tools out there. And don't feel you have to understand this, just know the name. So if they come up again, you'll know what that's all about. Another tool is chromosome browsing. And what chromosome browsing is that it is a way of seeing how your chromosome segments overlap with someone else's. And MyHeritage, 23andMe, DNA Painter is another way of doing it, and Family Tree DNA all have chromosome browsing. But Ancestry does not. And there's been a lot of criticism for them not having this, but they don't need, they have so many other things they don't need. They don't, you go somewhere else if you want it, I think is their argument. Auto cluster is another one. And what are the odds is another. These are just names, just remember. And Ged Match. Okay, so I'm going to just share with you a little bit about this, and then I want to get into Ged Match because that's the forensic part. Chromosome browsing is a tool that lets you see those DNA segments that are shared between you and a genetic match. And these 4 have chromosome browsing. And this is what it looks like. This is my heritage. I take myself and I move David up into a little box. It's really easy. And then I move some other people that I think might have the same chromosome matches, might be in the same genetic network as David and me, and I move them into the boxes. And you can see here that there's a match. These, the orange and the green didn't really match, but David and I and this person who is Michelle match. We all match. So that shows me that Michelle is in the same genetic network that David is. Our chromosomes overlap. And this is the Johansson family. And I know that Michelle is part of this. Don't have very many centimorgans with David. I only have 20, and that's pretty much as low as I would go. But I know that he is a Johansson. And I know that Michelle is now. So my heritage has a really easy chromosome browser. 23andMe has a really easy chromosome browser. Ingrid, my cousin Ingrid, and I put in another cousin, Sharon. Put them together, and you can see that Ingrid and Sharon and I triangulate. The 3 of us are actually share a family, and it's the Nystrom family. So what chromosome browsing does is shows you that you are in the same genetic network, and it's very visual. A man by the name of Johnny Pearl went crazy with this and created a third-party web DNA site. It's totally apart from all those subscription sites. It's free, and he allows you to put in whoever you want from Ancestry, MyHeritage, whatever, and figure it out. So I used his tool, and I put in my grandfather. These are people that are part of my grandfather. Here's my great-grandfather. Okay, here we are. These are all DNA people that have a common ancestor of my great-grandfather. It gets complex. People go crazy. This is another great-grandfather. These are all people that are related there. People love this. And so if you really get into DNA and you really are having so much fun with it, experiment with DNA Painter. It is amazing, but it does take up time. It becomes addictive, and it is definitely a rabbit hole, but it works. It definitely works. So you can see exactly where you match, and you can figure, the goal again is to create a genetic network. Okay, that's DNA Painter. Okay. Now okay, so these are extra tools. There's chromosome browsing. This is auto clustering. Remember, just think of those terms if they come up again. Collins Leeds came up with this, and they came up with an algorithm where you throw raw DNA and with others, and they put it all together and they create boxes, which are of genetic communities. But I want to show you the MyHeritage one because it is so amazing. This MyHeritage, let's see if I can pull this up here. MyHeritage one is, this is the way it works. Okay, I put in my DNA. And they create auto clusters of groups that are genetic networks. So cluster number one, let's see, I'll go over this way. Cluster number one. These names look very Finnish to me. So I think this, I don't know who these people are. I think this is probably a Finnish cluster. This looks very Swedish. This looks English. This looks Finnish again. So they've taken people from your DNA sample and compared it to others in MyHeritage and put you in genetic communities. Isn't that amazing? It just is the things people come up with. So that's another thing that you can play around with. DNA Painter also has come up with a thing called Watto. What are the odds? You put up your family tree and they help you figure out who people are. And that's another tool that people like to use called Watto. What are the odds? If you hear that spoken of, that's what that's all about. Okay, now I want to get into Ged Match. And Ged Match is a third tool that you can use. Ged Match is a third-party tool where you take your raw DNA, you upload it, no money unless you want to get more sophisticated with them. You upload your DNA match and it connects you with people who have done it from Ancestry, from MyHeritage. It brings people together and you don't have to go to each site. Well, law enforcement saw that this might be a possibility. And they have used Ged Match to find the Golden State Killer, the NorCal rapist, the murder of a young couple in Washington State in 1987. I don't know if any of you caught the TV program Genetic Detective with CeCe Moore. They really showed how they do these criminal investigations. We have a local person, Barbara Ray Vintner. She lives on the Monterey Peninsula. She was the one who discovered the Golden State Killer. And she had a group of volunteers that were working at the Family History Center here in Seaside with family trees all over the walls. They all were working on family lines, trying to put the tree together. And they are the ones who found the Golden State Killer. And as a result, she got a lot of national press, and she was selected as one of the 100 people of the year who made an impact by Time magazine. And she is a local person, an amazing person, a genetic genealogist. And this has just, this in the last 5 years, this has just become an amazing thing. And Ged Match is the company that was behind it. It was started by this man, Curtis Rogers, and a friend who was an IT guy. They simply put together a database and said, upload your raw data and we'll connect you with other people from other DNA companies. And we'll allow you to connect with them and analyze their DNA. And the page looks something like this. You upload your raw data and then they do matches, very similar to the others that we've looked at. So you put in my kit and I compare it with somebody else and they tell me what chromosomes I share, which is a chromosome browsing. They tell me the location on my chromosome and they tell me on chromosome 4, I have 11.7 centimorgans and that I have 177.5 centimorgans with this person and that our common ancestor is 3 generations up. That would be like a great-great-grandparent. So it's not pretty, it's just information that's out there. It's data that you can use. Okay, Gedmatch started to be used and it became aware that they were using people's DNA in terms of law enforcement. And as a result, they had to change their terms of service and they had to say, wait a minute, you all million+ people are on this site. I want you to know that law enforcement is now using this site and I want you to opt in or opt out. Because they realized that they hadn't told people that law enforcement would be using their site. And to find the serial rapist and to find the NorCal killer and all these different people, they were using cousins to find a cousin who was then apprehended. So they had to come out and say, yes, law enforcement is using this site. Okay, how does it work? Well, it's a computer, it's DNA, and it's traditional genealogy. It's making a family tree to find out who this person is. It's also using different tools. CODIS is a database that the FBI uses. It's the database of people who have been arrested and convicted. 16 million DNA profiles are on it, but it doesn't work for someone who hasn't been caught and never arrested. So these 50-year-old cold cases are not caught by CODIS. And then there's a Department of Defense DNA, which is everybody who's in the military. And you would hope that there wouldn't be people who have a record in that database. So that's not as helpful. Law enforcement does not use Ancestry labs, does not use family tree DNA labs. It has its own lab, which is Parabon Nano Labs, and it does the law enforcement testing. So the DNA that's been hanging around for 50 years, which was evidence, the person was never caught, has been sent to Parabon Nano Labs. They do a raw DNA report, and then it's uploaded to Ged Match, and that opens it all up to a whole nother database. And as of 2018, I'm sure it's much more now, 200 perpetrator profiles have been uploaded to Ged Match. So they put the DNA sample into Ged Match, creates a digital file with an Excel sheet with all kinds of genetic information. They use an algorithm to transcribe that information, and then they start to make predictions about the ancestors of that DNA owner. They upload a genetic profile from the crime scene to Ged Match, just to go over this again. They sort through the autosomal DNA matches, and they estimate the number of generations to a common recent ancestor. So you have a cold case, you have the person the perpetrator, and he links with someone, he or she links with someone else who is a Ged Match person, and you know that Ged Match person, who that person is, and you start to create a tree. You triangulate the common ancestor and develop the tree. You go in and do genealogy research. You look for obituaries, people that are mentioned, the birth, marriage, death records. You just do a genealogy research. You research the family trees of the matches until you find how they fit with the killer or the person. You develop a list of suspects, and then you confirm it. In the case of the rapist, they had Barbara Ray Vintner had two suspects that she pretty much narrowed it down to. They were of Italian descent, and the police were following both of those suspects, and they needed to get a DNA sample to confirm that it matched the one that had been in evidence. And he threw a coffee cup into the trash on the way out of a fast food place. And the coffee cup nailed it and showed that he was the one. And that's how they found it, because of Ged Match. Ged Match got a little nervous about this, and they realized the liability for these two men is too much. And they've since sold this product to a Varagon, which is now using, which is pretty much now law enforcement. And people are still using it, but they know that their DNA may be used for law enforcement. They're opting into that. So is Lisa Louise Cook, another podcaster. It is a wild, wild west right now in the world of DNA. Nothing is guaranteed. There are ethical issues. Relatives become genetic informants unbeknownst to them. And the reality is that any decision to have our DNA tested impacts all members of our family. And there are privacy issues. Is law enforcement invading users' privacy? Well, they pretty much put up terms of service now so that you agree to this. But at one point you hadn't agreed to it with Ged Match. And the question is, they have been using that for that. It wasn't these two men. It was just that law enforcement saw this is a way to go, and we're able to do it. So our dilemma, how to share information with cousins and get results, and how to avoid risks that are involved in sharing that information. DNA companies have a lot of our information. They know our ethnicity, they know how we're related to other test takers, they know about our health, and they've got our email and our credit. So they do have a lot of information. There are some laws. There is the GINA, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects us. There is a California state law that protects us. And there is a Florida and California laws that regulate how testing companies can use, sell, or share genetic information. So there are laws to protect us. However, laws are interpreted differently over time. So we're correct to have concerns. We know about hacking. We know who might profit, from our DNA. Are these laws broad enough? And if any of you are interested in this, you might want to explore those two laws. And what is the future role of law enforcement in DNA? We don't know where that's going. And companies' policy change. In fact, Ancestry has been sold twice in the last few years. Family Tree DNA was just sold. MyHeritage has just been sold. As they're sold, different decisions are made. And what about law enforcement? Are there standards? The courts will decide what will be acceptable. Actually, in the Golden State Killer case, Cece Moore was meant to be a witness to explain the value of DNA, and she wasn't even called, and he was convicted. So it looks like the court cases are accepting this as evidence. And that was a question whether or not it would be. I guess that will be proved over and over again. But at this point, it is convicting. It is being used to convict people. Gedmatch is open to law enforcement. Family Tree and DNA recently opened its database to law enforcement. If this interests you, check out Judy Russell. She writes a lot about this, and she has a blog. Things to consider. Consider whether you'd like to have your DNA tested. Weigh the positive with the negative. If you've tested, explore the options on your company's website. Be sure and read the terms of service. And I'll put this in the notes. These are different ways you can read the terms of service. We often don't. We just move on and say yes, yes, yes. But you might want to think about that. And inform cassette, where you want things sent to and shared. Might look at that too. Final thought. Only way to be safe is not to take the DNA test. It's just like the only way not to get in a car accident is not to drive or get in a car. So it's up to us to take responsibility for our actions. There's no guarantee that anything we put online is private, and we need to weigh whether or not that's what we want to do. That's our challenge, and that's our dilemma. But that said, DNA has solved some brick walls. It's helped adoptees find their birth parents. I've met some wonderful cousins that I didn't even know existed and developed relationships and met them personally. And it has helped us solve cold cases that go back nearly 50 years. I want to end on a positive note with DNA. Living DNA, the British company, is very into education, and they have a program with their students where they go in and tell students about DNA. And they offer students the opportunity to take a DNA test, of course, with the parents' permission. And when the students view the results, they're more alike than not. And they have found that bullying has actually decreased in those schools where the DNA tests have been administered. One little girl who is of Indian background actually has DNA matches with an English girl. And the two of them are so excited to see that they are related by a common ancestor. I wanted to remind you, these are called web portals. Librarians call them finding aids. And what they are is a list of sites that they recommend. And so they're a portal, and LDS Genealogy is that. Family Search Wiki is that. And Cindy's list, which looks like this, is another great one. These are ones just to make note of. Cindy started this about 20 years ago, and she just started collecting websites. And it's not easy to search, but you can browse. She develops her page around categories. And the categories are all kinds of things, from adoption to newspapers. Here's newspapers. And she too tells you where newspapers are online. So if you go into newspaper C, she has a whole list of newspapers that are online that start with C. Cindy's list is a great list. The revolutionary, her revolutionary muster lists are good. If you are at a brick wall, check out Cindy's list. She really has lots of good recommendations, and she's been doing this for 20 years. She's got over 300,000 links that she recommends. Library of Congress has Chronicling America. That's another web portal, a library portal of finding aids. Chronicling America has wonderful newspaper sources, and they're online. I've gotten a lot of good information from Chronicling America. It looks like this. These are all digitized newspapers, and you can search. So be sure and check out this. Let's see. This is what I wanted to show you. A U.S. newspaper directory and digitized newspapers. You can actually identify the years, put in a source or a particular paper you're interested in, and Library of Congress has digitized millions of pages of newspapers. Another web portal. The easiest thing is to pick up the phone and email the public library in your ancestors' town to find out if they have the local newspaper. And if they do, they'll be happy to scan pages for you on a particular subject. And then on the topic of newspapers, Genealogy Bank and newspapers.com are two subscription newspaper sites. So that's all related to the newspaper question. Then there was a question about find a grave and how to submit corrections. Very easy. There's a submit right down here, suggest edits. You write to the manager of that memorial site. I would suggest you actually add proof of why you think they're wrong. Like if you have a document or you have some knowledge that they wouldn't have, so that you can defend the fact that you think there should be correction. Be prepared to ask to be the manager of that site, because a lot of people take pictures of graves. They don't have a connection to the person, and they might like to just say, hey, why don't you take it over? You have a family connection. So anyway, that's easy to do. And then someone asked about find a graveyard in England. Yes, absolutely. And there's 243 countries where find a graveyard exists. It is underrepresented in other countries. US is the main one, but it is active in those countries.